Part 1. There is a kind of sorrow that does not arrive with tragedy. It does not knock at the door after loss or failure. No, this sorrow is already there waiting in the cradle, woven into the first breath, present before memory begins. If you have lived long enough to know what I mean, if you have carried something heavy for so many years that you've forgotten what it felt like to stand straight, then perhaps you'll already understand the man we are about to meet. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and before he was a president, before he was a legend, carved in marble, he was a boy, a thin, awkward boy with sad gray eyes, growing up in a wilderness so remote that the howling of wolves was more familiar than the sound of church bells. This is not a story about politics or war. This is a story about a man who carried darkness inside him for his entire life and somehow used that darkness to light the way for others. Picture the year 1816. A tiny settlement in southern Indiana, carved out of dense forest. The Lincoln family has just arrived from Kentucky, seeking a fresh start in a place where fresh starts are paid for in blisters and broken backs. The cabin they build is not much more than 3 walls and a dirt floor. The 4th wall remains open to the elements for an entire winter. Snow drifts inside. The fire barely holds back the cold. Young Abraham is 7 years old, already tall for his age, with limbs that seem too long for his body. But what strikes those who meet him is not his appearance. It is his stillness. The way sadness seems to pool in his eyes like rainwater in a hollow stone. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, notices this quality in her son. She is a quiet woman unable to read or write, but possessing what neighbors call unusual intelligence. She tells young Abraham stories and says he is meant for something special. What she cannot tell him is that she will not live to see what that something is. In the autumn of 1818, a shadow falls over the community. They call it milk sickness, a mysterious illness from cows grazing on white snakeroot. The poison accumulates in the milk, and those who drink it die slowly, painfully. Nancy Hanks Lincoln is 34 years old when the sickness takes her. Abraham is 9. There are moments in childhood that divide time itself, before and after. For Abraham Lincoln, the death of his mother was such a moment. He helped his father build the coffin. He watched as they lowered her into the cold Indiana earth, in a grave without a headstone, and something inside him, something soft and hopeful, began to harden into something else. Years later, Lincoln would rarely speak of his mother. He once told a friend that everything good in him he owed to her, but he could not speak of her death. The wound was too deep, too much a part of who he had become. Grief in childhood does not simply pass. It does not heal like a scraped knee. Grief in childhood becomes architecture. It becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. Every joy that comes later is built on top of that sorrow. If you know this, if you, too, carry an old grief that has become part of your bones, then you'll already understand Abraham Lincoln better than any history book could teach you. The years that followed were hard. His father remarried a kind woman named Sarah Bush Johnston, who encouraged Abraham's hunger for books. But the boy had changed. He was quieter now, more prone to long silences. His stepmother would later say that there was something in Abraham she could never quite reach, a room inside him that stayed locked, a sadness that lived beneath his jokes, beneath even his kindest smiles. That locked room would remain with Lincoln for the rest of his life. It would nearly destroy him more than once, but it would also become the source of his greatest strength. For there is a strange alchemy in the human soul. Sometimes, The very wound that cripples us also teaches us how to walk. Part 2. The young man who arrived in New Salem, Illinois, in 1831, was 22 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and owned almost nothing. His clothes were too short, his pockets were empty, his education amounted to less than a year of formal schooling. But Abraham Lincoln had something that could not be measured. He had a gift for language, a memory that could hold entire books, and a desperate, burning hunger to become something more than his circumstances had prepared him to be. New Salem was a small village on the Sangamon River, perhaps 300 souls. It was the kind of place where a young man with wit and ambition might just find a foothold. Lincoln found more than a foothold. He found friends, mentors, and for a brief moment, something that looked almost like hope. And then he found Anne Rutledge. History has argued about Anne. Some say the romance was exaggerated after Lincoln's death. Others insist it was the great love of his life. What we know is this: she was intelligent, kind, and beautiful. Lincoln was drawn to her, and in 1835, she died of typhoid fever at the age of 22. Lincoln's response was not grief, it was collapse. His friends grew alarmed. He stopped eating, he stopped working, he wandered the fields alone, talking to himself, weeping. He spoke openly about suicide. His friend William Greene later recalled that they took all knives and razors away from him. They watched him in shifts, afraid to leave him alone. For weeks, Lincoln existed in a fog of despair, so thick that those around him feared he might never emerge. He called it the hypo, short for hypochondria, which in the 19th century meant something closer to what we now call depression. He would struggle with it for the rest of his life. Lincoln did emerge. Slowly, painfully, he forced himself back into the world of the living. He returned to his law studies. He ran for political office. He tried, day by day, to build a life out of the rubble of his despair, but the defeats kept coming. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois state legislature. He lost. In 1833, his business failed spectacularly, leaving him with debts that would take over a decade to repay. He called it the national debt, a joke that barely masked his shame. He won a seat in the legislature in 1834, but his political career was a constant struggle. He lost races, he lost allies, he watched lesser men rise while he remained stuck. And then there was Mary Todd. Mary was intelligent, ambitious, and utterly unlike anyone Lincoln had ever known. She came from a prominent family. She spoke French. She had opinions about politics and wasn't afraid to share them. Lincoln was captivated. They became engaged in 1840. And then, on January 1st, 1841, the day they were supposed to be married, Lincoln broke it off. We do not know exactly what happened, but the broken engagement triggered his second great breakdown. He took to his bed. He stopped attending the legislature. His friend Joshua Speed feared for his life. Lincoln wrote letters that survived to this day, letters that speak of a darkness so complete that death seemed preferable to continuing. "I am now the most miserable man living," he wrote. "If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth. Whether I shall ever be better I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not." Let those words settle. This is not ancient history. This is a man, a brilliant, deeply human man, standing at the edge of an abyss and wondering if there was any reason to step back. He did step back. He and Mary eventually reconciled. They married in 1842. They had children. Lincoln's law practice grew. But the hypo never left him. It was always there, waiting in the shadows. And here is what Lincoln came to understand over years of struggle. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the soil in which success grows. Every defeat taught him something: patience, humility, the ability to lose gracefully and try again, the knowledge that he could survive the unsurvivable. He was 42 years old when he lost his Senate race to Stephen Douglas in 1858. He had been losing races for more than 25 years. 2 years later, he was elected President of the United States. But even that victory, especially that victory, would bring a weight that no man should have to carry. Continue in the next video.